On July 27th, I jumped in the car at around 5 a.m. and I hit the road. I had my mind set on a trip up the shore all the way to Trepassey. I was back home in March and I planned to do this trip back then, but time constraints and other priorities only allowed me to get as far as Fairyland. Nothing was stopping me this time though. This has been a lousy year. We're well past halfway through now, and while I never wish away time, I won't be sad to turn the calendar page this coming January 1st. I took this trip up the Southern Shore Highway in July to ease my mind a bit at a time when I just needed some kind of relief. This trip was just me, solo. I needed some time alone. My destination was Trepassey, and Trepassey deserves its own dedicated video more than just this quick mention, so stay tuned for that one. But this one is about a couple of spots along the route to Trepassey where I was able to find some much needed peace during a dark time in my life. I needed some peace, and for whatever reason, I find lighthouse sites to be so peaceful, even the ones that get overrun with tourists in the summer like at Cape Spare or Long Point near Twillingate. I just have this thing about lighthouses where my mind slows down and I can relax. I've talked about lighthouses in admiration before. There are a couple that I've focused on specifically in videos, like the beautiful stone one down in Rose Blanche. I've actually talked about quite a few. These East Coast icons are all over Newfoundland's endless and impossibly rugged coast. Sometimes they're accessibly located, like right there on the edge of a seaside town, like in Heart's Content, but usually they take some effort to reach. Sometimes you need to bring a snack with you, and sometimes the lunches are provided at a reasonable price. These silent giants are as important to the history of this place as any individual person. Lives have been saved because of them, and many lives have been lost because these lights were misread or obscured by weather. Most of them are situated on the edge of breathtaking cliffs, like literally breathtaking. Standing on the lighthouse grounds on Bell Island, for example, it gave me butterflies. I haven't visited every lighthouse in Newfoundland, but I've seen many of them. There is one particularly important one down on the southeast corner of the Avalon, not too far from Trepassey, that I've never visited before. I was going to change that this year. This terrible old year. The lighthouse at Cape Race was going to brighten up my year somehow, some way. I could feel it. Now, on the way there, I also wanted to make a quick stop in the tiny town of Cappahayden. There's a site there that every Newfoundlander should visit, marking a disaster from just over 100 years ago that I believe many of us are familiar with, but maybe that we don't appreciate for its gravity. In February of 1918, the SS Florizel ran aground at Hornhead, just off the coast of Cappahayden. The ship ran up on the rocks close enough to the beach that the fishermen from the area could clearly see the waves crashing over it, but far enough from shore in this late winter storm that was brewing that any kind of assistance was impossible. All these people on land could do was watch for 27 hours until the ocean settled a bit. 94 people lost their lives out on the water, while 44 were eventually saved. Maybe the Florizel shouldn't have ever left St. John's Harbor on that stormy February night. Maybe the ship's chief engineer shouldn't have throttled the engine without telling the captain, slowing its progress so he could manipulate the ship's arrival time to Halifax, thereby throwing off the schedule of the Florizel altogether, which would give him a little bit of extra time to spend with his family who was there in Halifax. It was a complex set of circumstances that ultimately led to this disaster. There is a timeline where if any one of the number of contributing factors leading to this calamity were subtracted from the equation, the beautiful but somber Peter Pan statue in Bowring Park might not exist. Ultimately, Captain Martin gave the order to steer the ship to the west as he thought he was rounding Cape Race. He was barely past Fairyland. This was a fatal mistake for the SS Florizel and for 94 of the souls on board. Had he been able to see the lights from shore that night along the route, there would be no story to tell. Unfortunately, that's not the timeline we live on. Cape Race was my other stop en route to Trepassey. By land, it's located at the end of a long gravel road which you can access from the Southern Shore Highway in the town of Portugal Cove South. I may have passed the UNESCO World Heritage Site known as the Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve on my way into the lighthouse grounds, but there was no one around this early in the morning to ask if what I think may have been Mistaken Point was in fact Mistaken Point. So I may have been mistaken. No, seriously, I'm not even sure if the small building I drove past was the interpretation center or if it was just some other random service building. Yeah, I actually pulled up on the lighthouse site at Cape Race on this particular morning in July, well before 8 a.m. This is after driving for about 2 hours on the Southern Shore Highway and then driving over the gravel road for about 20 minutes or so. The lighthouse there has the biggest light I've seen in a lighthouse in Newfoundland, and it was still turning in its lantern room, still doing its job even as the sun was up. The Cape Race site also bears witness to the Marconi wireless radio station that was once located there. That station, whose namesake is well known in St. John's for another historic event that took place on Signal Hill in 1901, played its own important role in history in April of 1912. The first SOS signal received on land from the Titanic after it struck that famous iceberg was received at this wireless station located at Cape Race. A desperate distress signal was sent out into the ether, and it was received, snatched out of the airwaves right here at this point on the edge of the world. The isolated, solitary power of the giant lighthouse that welcomed me was impressive and kind of directly symbolic of Newfoundland in its own way. Other than the light, a passing cargo ship off the coast heading to who knows where, and a few seabirds, it was just me there. For miles and miles, not another human to be seen except for the cutouts. This was an awesome, inexplicable feeling. It was a feeling I couldn't anticipate, and a feeling that I didn't know I needed until I was right there in that moment. I was in a lot of pain at that precise moment in time. This stop at a previously unvisited lighthouse was my medicine for the day. Actually standing there with my 2 feet planted firmly on ground that I know has been walked on or sailed by people with far more interesting stories to share than mine, was a revelation. I felt, just by standing there so far from anyone else in the world, like I was actually shedding off a few layers of grief. I can't explain it. I didn't yell into the air or anything like that, but I felt like I sent a message out into the ocean waves to be carried off without a specific recipient in mind to receive it. This remote station, overlooking the relentless fury of the North Atlantic, not known for much more than as being the recipient of the first desperate cries for help from the most famous shipwreck in history, on this day acted as the transmission station for one person's pain, sending it back out into the Atlantic.